Jamie Beaton is a rare mix of academic and entrepreneurial excellence. His LinkedIn profile is stacked with many of the most elite education institutions in the world.
I have a bachelor's in applied math from Harvard, a master of science from Harvard as well, a Stanford MBA, a Stanford Education Masters, an Oxford PhD, a Yale JD, a Princeton Master of Finance, a UPenn Education Entrepreneurship degree, a Tsinghua Master of Global Affairs, King's College London Military Studies. I think that's pretty much the rodeo.
I don't mean to laugh, but that is genuinely insane. And also has a unicorn business valued at $1 billion plus.
Yeah, it's all linked together though.
His company, Crimson Education, helps students around the world follow in his footsteps. And it's made $551 million in sales since inception. A third of that was earned in the last 12 months. What's your success rate on getting these students in?
So actually today, Crimson has the most Ivy League results of any company on the planet. So we've got 1,315 Ivy League offers globally. Just this year, we had over 313, which is more than triple our closest competitor. Our students get in at about 7 times the hit rate of applying by themselves. And our students, if they apply to 8 schools, they've got a 98% shot of getting into a target or a reach school. So these are industry-leading stats.
In this episode, Jamie and I discuss if higher education is still relevant in the age of AI. Welcome to the world of higher education. It's a second home to Jamie, who's excelled at more levels in this environment than most billionaires' kids. But he doesn't act like your typical scholar.
Well, I'm stoked we got in. That was legit. Yeah. I think it's going to be hard to get.
Just like everyone to know that we literally wrangled our way, Jamie wrangled our way into Columbia Uni.
Yeah, love it.
Security was high due to recent protests, something we'll talk about later on. First, take a look at this campus in central New York. It's incredible, and for many, unattainable. But Jamie and his company seem to have cracked the admissions acceptance code. Is there a dual intent by you going to these universities? Are you hunting product information at the same time?
So I think when I was first building Crimson, going to business school was a no-brainer. I was a young founder. I wanted to learn how you build these high-growth companies. That made sense. I think going to law school also super helpful too, because we're operating in all these different countries, different jurisdictions.
Means you pay less for lawyers because you understand it, totally.
So that makes sense. And then my PhD was on what drives online student outcomes. That helped with Crimson Global Academy, our school. So I'd say the first 5 programs, they all made serious sense. The latest ones have been more for my entertainment, so just topics that I really wanted to study and enjoy. But of course, the benefit of them is I understand all these different universities, the schools, the cultures, so we can advise students. We can also hire staff from them, from the alumni community. We have hundreds of counselors, many of them come from these schools. And then, I'm on the pulse of new programs, what's going on. So it definitely helps with Crimson for sure. But at this point, it's become more of a learning hobby, I would say.
What's your time split between learning and higher education versus actually running Crimson?
Probably about 90% is running Crimson.
I would have thought so, yeah.
The studying is now much more part-time than it once was.
But to do those scale of degrees, and you're not doing these just online, you're physically turning up and doing these insane courses while also running a huge global business.
It's been really helpful being in New York because I can zip down to Yale for 2 days of class, or zip down to Princeton for a couple of days of class or an exam or something. So it's definitely been helpful being here. And then of course during COVID, I could do a degree in China and also Oxford online. So that's helped. So it's been a bit lucky with the circumstances, but mainly I do in-person programs because online's not as fun.
At its core, Crimson helps prepare students to excel at interviews and essays, molding them, in some cases over years, to be a fit for universities in the US and Europe. Crimson began as an Ivy League admissions coaching scheme, effectively, but I understand that's not all that Crimson is now. Can you explain to me what Crimson is and what it does in 2025?
Absolutely. So the origin, of course, was helping ambitious Kiwis getting into the world's best universities and navigating that journey. From there, we realized actually we could do this for students all around the world. So today we're helping kids from 20 plus countries, from China to India to Japan, even to the Middle East, helping navigate them through this process from high school to the States. Now, after a while, we realized actually we were getting pretty good at this and we should help Americans too. So about 7 years ago, we set up shop in California. And now today, Crimson's the largest provider of college admissions guidance for American kids getting into US colleges, which I think is pretty funny because they trust, of course, Kiwis to get into their own schools. Now, after college admissions, we've expanded into postgraduate admissions too. helping folks with MBA, law school, PhD. And then we have an online high school with thousands of kids who trust us as their full high school experience, which is pretty cool. And then we've got other things from tuition academies to AI learning platforms to Revision Village, which is the most popular study resource platform for the IB. So we've really tried to expand from the 16 to 18 New Zealand to the US corridor to a much more global kind of 5 through to early professionals learning ecosystem.
Interesting. So in terms of countries that Crimson effectively touches through students that you admit into universities where around the world, how many countries and continents are you in?
We're in about 35 countries today, and the US is our biggest single market, but we've got a great presence everywhere from Southeast Asia, Singapore, Vietnam, Thailand. We even actually had operations in Russia for the longest time. With the recent spiciness, we've moved out a little bit to more the broader CIS region. Kazakhstan would be probably our most exotic office today.
Where does the bulk of your revenue come from across those business divisions, from like the physical to the online offerings?
So still today, about 70% of our business is college admissions. So that's definitely the thriving heart of Crimson. And within that, we've really built this global brand for helping students get into the most ambitious schools. So not necessarily just the Ivy League, but think about schools like Duke, UC Berkeley, the great UK schools like University College London or Oxford. So that would be the core. And then of that, the US is about a third of that market. And then 40% is Asia Pacific at large, from China through to Japan.
When you're speaking to prospective students or existing students and their parents, what do they want from Crimson? What are they trying to seek through your offerings?
So at the core, university is the fastest way to go from any corner of the world to these epicenters of innovation, whether it be AI, entrepreneurship in Silicon Valley, breaking into Wall Street like it did at Tiger. And there's nothing faster for a kid from, for example, Australia than going through these schools. So fundamentally what they're looking for is this ambitious career on the world stage. They want to make sure that the university degree kind of ports them into these centers of global capitalism. And so they're looking at, of course, an amazing university experience, but also all the jobs that come next. And today our Crimson students are working at the likes of Tesla, OpenAI, great firms like Goldman Sachs. Many have gone on to raise venture capital rounds. One of our young Australians actually sold his company recently to Amazon, which is pretty cool.
For how much?
Good question. I should ask him, but at least in probably the tens of millions, I would say. So a pretty good outcome. And then we've even got a Kiwi, Nancy Liu, who's in the New Zealand government, who came through Crimson as well.
In a way, Crimson has kept these institutions alive by keeping top talent flowing through its doors. But the prestige of places like this may be at risk. Artificial intelligence is democratizing knowledge, and possibly with it, the value of centuries-old education institutions. How do you see that ultimately changing education, and for better or for worse?
So at the core, AI is really exciting because today, if you're a student and you have to get tutors in all your subjects, that's pretty expensive. And that could cost tens of thousands per year for that full personalized experience. Now, AI can't fully replace tutors because a lot of the student relationship is actually that mentor-mentee connection, that accountability, almost like a personal trainer. But for most of your questions, you're stuck on a math question. You need to get feedback on your English essay. Rather than waiting a month for your teacher, you can get that feedback instantly from a great AI tool. So the promise of AI is to really have a personalized tutor for every subject 24/7 and to really collapse that inequity that comes from whether or not your family can actually hire a tutoring firm. So I think that's a huge opportunity. The second piece is around career guidance. If you think about your classic career counselors around the world, they typically aren't that clued into what's happening at frontier companies, especially in different countries. Maybe they're familiar with local opportunities. With AI tools, you can actually get career advice really fast that is generally pretty good and helps you, with that discovery phase. So I would say it really opens up access to a really world-class education to students globally. The ultimate solution will be combining, I think, teachers with AI, because you still need to have that mentor-mentee inspiration that really makes a student want to get up every day and do their work, which AI struggles with. But I think it will help a lot with, boosting academic grades. Of course, the challenge right now, which is really ripping through universities and high schools, is students are using AI, of course, for essays, assignments, homework. And many of the traditional assessment methodologies that you and I did in high school really don't work anymore because the take-home essay is a thing of the past. And even NCA internal exams in New Zealand, the vast majority can be done by AI, and they're very hard to detect actually, which means we've got to move back to things. For example, I was just at Cambridge and the final exams were pen and paper on campus because they can't do things like remote assessments anymore. So that, of course, is creating a huge headache for teachers around the world.
It begs the question though, in an age where information is abundant because of the internet, knowledge is no longer a human power, it is AI's tool as well. does education matter? Like, is education still relevant in this world?
So I would actually say the demand for these schools like a Stanford have actually grown incredibly in the last 10 years. So a lot of these schools have seen twice as many applicants in the last decade. NYU, for example, right here in New York City, has gone from admitting 40% back in 2013 to less than 7% now. So it's become one of the world's most selective schools. And the question is sort of why, and there are a couple of reasons. The first thing is a lot of these employers, whether it be a Goldman Sachs or a Microsoft, they still recruit on campus at these top universities in droves. So if you're an ambitious student, of course you can get into these jobs from anywhere, but if you want to get into that New York Goldman Sachs office or McKinsey New York, like our Kiwi student Gia Dua from Linfield, she came through Duke, got access to those recruiters, then landed that job. So that career connectivity is still very hard to beat, because if you're McKinsey, you can't just go and recruit from anywhere in the world very easily. The universities do that filtering for you. The second piece is that campus community of amazing scholars. Of course, at a place like Harvard or Yale, there are talented, ambitious students from all over the world. And we all know we're such a function of our environment. And so when you go to these places, you can't help but leave much more inspired, swinging big, and of course connected, whether it be tapping into investors or founders for your company or whatever. That's a second huge piece. The third and final part are professors. And of course, these professors are at the cutting edge of world-leading research. My thesis advisor at Harvard, for example, was Larry Summers, who advised presidents, then would come and teach me macroeconomics. That kind of connectivity is, of course, world-class. And if you want to break frontier research and actually create new knowledge, you need to be working with those leading minds, because of course AI is looking at the existing corpus of human knowledge and splitting it back to you. But if you want to break new research, that's where academia is still very important.
Yeah, it seems like the value that these institutions will continue to hold, and perhaps the last thing that they will be able to hold, is the network effect. Is that what you see these institutions like a Harvard, a Stanford, a Yale turning into, effectively like a Y Combinator, and it's the people that surround that institution, not actually the knowledge that you're taught within it?
That's bang on. I would actually say these universities have become like a Y Combinator, but for any industry, not just entrepreneurship. So if you want to, for example, be a top doctor like Ben Zhang, a Kiwi from Pakuranga who went to Harvard undergrad, now he's at Harvard Medical School, that is like the Y Combinator for medicine. And so you get to meet the world's brightest minds in those areas, you get connected to leaders in industry, and it opens up those doors for internships and everything. So yeah, I would say that's exactly what these schools are doing. That's also why, for example, take Nathaniel Masfin-Yen, a young Kiwi boy. When he was 19 at Stanford, he raised a $3.3 million venture capital round.
At 19?
At 19.
Damn.
Crazy, right? Like, think about that. You go onto campus and within a year, boom, VCs are happy to back you. And that is partially because of that Y Combinator effect, that the universities are a kind of talent signal that gives you confidence to kind of get behind someone.
And having that certificate on paper is a proof point that you're worth something. But I wanted to pose to you how that's changing. And we've seen some of the biggest and best companies in the world, take Rocket Lab, for example, they don't hire people based on skills and certificates. They are hiring people based on character, and then who have no engineering experience, and then they will teach them to become rocket engineers. Is real world experience, and perhaps you think character and companies adopting and hiring that way, like Crimson's biggest competition?
So actually, Crimson is a really huge fan of live work experience. Actually, one of the things we do is we have this program where high schoolers around the world can do work experience in some of the world's great companies like Ferrari, and they can get experience as to what it's like to be a mechanical engineer, for example, when they're in high school. Because the traditional high school experience today in every country basically lacks any kind of career connectivity. Things that you and I do every day, we had no experience to basically in high school, right? And so I would say, that's a huge part of actually getting in. And if you want to get into a place like a Stanford or Yale or a Harvard, you need that work experience. But more generally, our philosophy isn't the universities and academic knowledge by itself is sufficient. You actually need that real world experience too. So we're always guiding our students, even on those who have gotten in already, what internships to get, what job strategy to go for. It's really about how you kind of optimize your ambitious life rather than going through any particular institution.
And you view education as like the access point to opening people's minds up to
Exactly. It's like this global catalyst, this springboard. Of course, you can do it from anywhere, but it's much easier to get into, for example, a Tesla from Stanford, like a lot of our alumni have done, than just applying online. And of course, that's tough.
So perhaps it was never about the education at all, rather who you know, not what you know. It's true for Jamie, whose advisors include former Harvard president and ex-US Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, former New Zealand Prime Minister Sir John Key, and Australia's 26th Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. Jamie co-founded Crimson with Chandra Kushaw and Fangzhou Zhang in 2013. Since then, it's raised almost $90 million from global investors including Tiger Global Management and Verlinvest. As an investor, when you consider all of the industries in the world that are ripe for disruption and innovation, how does education stack up?
I think it's right at the top. Harvard, Oxford, top universities around the world, they're not growing themselves. They're not creating new seats, right? But the world population is growing. The strength and ambition of the university degree is growing in the minds of consumers. The affordability for people all around the world is increasing, and so demand for great educational services for great education is increasing, and yet the supply is not, right? Part of what Crimson's mission is to open up access to these great institutions for kids all around the world. Americans are, I think, predisposed from a young age to sort of understand the college admissions process, and obviously they have parents who've gone through it themselves. I think one of the most incredible things about Crimson is how often they've brought first generation Ivy League students to those universities, where they're not getting in based on familiarity with the American education system. They're getting in based on their own ambition and their own drive, and they have to learn how the U.S. college system works from scratch. I think that's a really special component of what they do.
One of those students is Soumil Singh, a kid from Hamilton, a town in New Zealand, who studied applied mathematics at Harvard and is now employed at an investment bank in New York. He put his own AI venture through Y Combinator, which gives him a unique view of education institutions versus idea incubators.
I view them in different categories, so it's difficult to compare them directly. I would say being at Harvard helped me, learn subjects and meet people that I could apply to Y Combinator with. It helped me explain why I was doing YC, all these sort of kind of details around my application. So it compounded into the admission into Y Combinator and ability to go through that program. YC is an investor, so they give you money to start building things. Harvard is not an investor in students typically, I guess. So the value is very different in terms of what they're actually doing. I would say YC, there's some really great immediate value in terms of helping you grow your company. Harvard, I think, provides sort of a long-term, lifelong kind of value and network that I can keep going into and tapping into. And some of the folks I met there are some of my best friends now, and I think that kind of value is going to continue compounding for a long time.
Yeah, I spoke with Jamie about this, about the network effect of these enormous education institutions, but you would have also felt that pretty strongly at somewhere like Y Combinator.
Yeah.
Can you kind of tell me the differences between the two in terms of like who you meet and how it then like accelerates your life and what you can do with it?
Yeah, I would say the difference in network between Y Combinator and Harvard is that in YC, everybody is essentially trying to build a venture-backed company. So everybody's an entrepreneur and working on very different problem areas, but all generally working on some kind of new technology or some kind of technical breakthrough or something to do with software, perhaps. At Harvard, there are folks, many more stripes. So there are folks that have gone into finance and have done very well. There are entrepreneurs as well. And I think the sort of diversity is maybe where there's some difference. I would say the average age of a YC founder is much higher than the folks I met at Harvard. I think I was probably one of the youngest people there. And so there's some difference in terms of stage of career as well. I would say they're both very powerful networks, though, for sure. And both networks that can continue kind of producing interesting sort of outcomes for the folks who were able to join them.
How do you at Crimson approach pricing education products and services in this world? Do you start to adopt that Y Combinator approach, and rather than charging somebody to go to a university or charging the fee to get access to it, do you start then taking a percentage of their income in their first job at Tesla or a SpaceX, or like a percentage of equity in their idea like a Y Combinator would? Do you think that that's sort of a future approach?
So we actually have a great fund, Crimson Accelerate, which invests in some of our best and brightest young alumni. So already we've had folks like Young Fun, a guy from Auckland who's been off to Stanford. He just raised about $8 million for a cybersecurity company in his mid-20s. And so we invested, for example, in the first round with him. So we of course love to get behind our alumni, but I think for the core Crimson service model, charging for the education delivery is probably how we'll stick. Because I think when you start doing income sharing agreements as your main revenue model, it's tricky. And also, if a student has massive success, you don't want to be charging them sort of massive fees. It's much better, in my opinion, to really make that a more consistent function for all students. So I would say no income share agreements for us for a little while.
I'm interested in where specifically you see growth coming from? Is it in something like Crimson Accelerate, or is it something in like Crimson Rise, which is for your 11 to 14-year-olds? Do you see that addressable market expanding in age and also in career for the students that come through your system?
So definitely it's around age, but also it's around ambition, which country you're applying to. So Crimson's now helping kids from age 5 all the way at Numberworks across New Zealand in our adorable learning centers with these cute little kids, all the way through to these postgrads who are applying for their PhDs and their fellowships. Our students are going from applying to just the US to now US, UK, EU, Singapore, medical schools, a whole variety of different pathways. And then learning model from our, of course, flagship 101 training at Crimson Core, all the way to our physical school we just opened in Takapuna, to our online school. So many different learning models. But the core of Crimson today that's driven really massive growth, particularly this year in North America, is just the huge volume of increased applicants going to US schools and the global demand for these top universities. Because people actually are asking the same question you are, which is, what's the value of this local university degree? What am I actually getting? And should I in fact be applying globally and actually comparing this opportunity to schools in Australia or schools in the US, and then making that best choice on the world stage? And so education is fundamentally becoming a global marketplace.
I wanted to ask you about these acquisitions that you've made recently, not only the physical school in Takapuna, which is down the road from my house, so I know exactly where it is,
nice.
But also one of the earliest acquisitions you made, which was Midview, and also Numberworks and Words. Funny story, my first ever job was as an English tutor at Numberworks and Words.
I love it. I was a student there when I was 5 to 8. Amazing place.
And look at you now. It obviously worked.
Look at you now.
But I'm interested in these acquisitions that you've made from the more online space into the physical schooling space. What's the long-term play? And I'm interested as to why you're getting into the physical aspect of it when everything seems to be going into sort of like the online course AI domain at the moment.
So in general, Crimson's a heavily online ecosystem. So we've got these offices in 20 countries, but the core delivery model, when you sign up for Crimson, most of your sessions are online through our app with live coaches around the world, different content, AI tutors, things like this. So the flagship is online, but there are some experiences where physical is really beneficial. Take a student who's 8 who wants to rebuild their passion for math. A Numberworks Physical Academy where they can sit next to their tutor and have that experience. When they get a bit stuck or bored, have that tutor support them physically, gets much better results than online in that kind of context. Where online is very powerful is typically for older students in high school or even an intermediate school that are quite motivated. That's where online is really great because it's flexible, it's convenient, and of course you can tap into experts from anywhere in the world. Just before this, I was coaching a boy who's at a boarding school in the US over in North Carolina. And so, that access is much better than someone you can find, for example, within that local community. So online's the heart of Crimson, but take, for example, our new physical school in Takapuna. If you're a student who wants a personalized learning experience, which also is going to use Crimson's online learning too, but also you've got that physical community, which is great for a school as well in those formative years, year 1 to year 8, that's where I think physical is still in its element.
So you think there's still in fact, more gains to be had in the bricks and mortar of education as opposed to online, because all of the progress has been online to date?
Yeah, I think online will keep ripping and online will be the majority, but I think blended will become very powerful where, you'll have a student, say, sitting in Takapuna, they'll be taking their math class in person, then they'll be doing an online research project with a professor who's currently at Columbia. And they'll be learning what it's like to, for example, do their first literature review or use a JSTOR database. And that experience couldn't be easily facilitated in just a physical school. And, I think that will ultimately be the future, hybrid learning models around the world.
You are a lifelong learner. You're also now becoming a professor at the Auckland University through their entrepreneurialism degree. Why do you feel like you also want to educate when you have enough on your plate running a unicorn business?
I'm really passionate about helping more young Kiwis launch companies. When I went through high school, the idea of entrepreneurship really never even entered my lexicon as something that I could do. I always thought actually entrepreneurship was what you said if you were unemployed. And my mum...
it is, isn't it?
Yeah, basically, until it gets going. But, I saw this and I thought, I want more young Kiwis launching companies. And I actually think in New Zealand right now, we're not capital constrained anymore. We're actually entrepreneur constrained. How many folks want to go out there and swing big and eat the glass and build these great companies? And so, the idea is I'm going to teach these 18-year-olds with Fangzhou as soon as they come into the university about what it's like to build these companies and hopefully change their career direction from, say, going off to a big 4, which I love, but, building more companies. So that's really the ambition.
Given Jamie and I both talk at 2x speed, in the hours we spent together in New York, we covered a lot. But there's one topic that seems to occupy a significant segment of his brain. Is that your long-term play, politics?
I think I'll be building for a long time to come. Yeah, I think nothing is quite as fun as entrepreneurship where you can, see an opportunity in the world, then go build it, rally a team behind it. And, I guess education's always really fueled my fires.
In America, the line between education and politics can be blurry, and is especially so under this administration. I'm interested in if you have a view on the, some would say, ideological hijacking of these education institutions like Ivy League, Harvard, Stanford. Is that something you've personally experienced being at these institutions? And if so, what's your view on what that means for education?
So I guess I think about my time at, say, Harvard undergrad. I took all these classes in areas from math to stats to finance to business to entrepreneurship. Very few of them have any kind of political exposure in general. And so I think for the typical student, you don't really see politics into the classroom almost at all. Even in international relations or government style class, still not that much. I think where you see it sometimes is in debates or in campus protests, or if you go and join political clubs like the Republicans on campus. At Yale Law, they have things like, for example, the Federal Society. And if you join that, you sort of yell to the campus that you're a Republican and you're really proud of that, and that will trigger a bit of animosity sometimes. But on the whole, I would say it's quite exaggerated. From an ideological standpoint, about 92% of undergrads at Harvard are Democratic voters. And so you do, of course, have that skew. But also international students tend to have a pretty balanced, neutral view as well. And so on the whole, I wouldn't say it's as highly charged as it seems. A lot of the protests are about, certain issues like Israel-Palestine. But if you're just a Republican guy rolling around or girl, you can have a pretty chill 4 years.
What about that from the top down though? Have you noticed or witnessed at all like any ideological views stemming from educators
Oh, I see.
in these organizations?
Good question. So I would say the presidents are usually very almost politician-like in their, well, I should say diplomatic-like in their neutrality. So they don't really have any sort of partisan smearing. Even when Trump is saying things that are really attacking higher education, few university presidents will actually speak about that. They'll generally opt for a more diplomatic tact, and a lot of their public comments are about the general value of academic research or inquiry. So I would say no, I haven't seen it all that much. The only class I can think of would be my Yale Law seminar on advanced contracts with Amy Chua, and she famously has helped lots of folks get Supreme Court clerkships, which is quite a political process. And within that class, she actively calls on people across different sides of the political aisle and encourages that free-flowing debate. But I think that's actually a good example of kind of what you want in the university, which is a relatively safe debating chamber for different ideas. And so I love that, and I thought it was a fun experience.
On recent administration
Spicy stuff.
alterations
Yes.
to education, specifically international student intake, do you have a view on what that means for education and also for your business, which its entire business really relies on putting these international students into these education institutions in America? Could that completely disrupt what you're doing?
It's a great question. So I would say a couple of things. There's 3 shocks so far. One is Trump saying he might ban Chinese students. The second is saying he might ban all international students from Harvard. And the third is freezing visa interviews. So first of all, for let's take the Chinese students, he recently announced that actually all Chinese students are open to come to America. And that was part of the trade tussle with Xi Jinping. So I think that was a classic Trump strategy where he initially announced this sort of scary thing to put pressure on China, but then walked it back entirely. Similarly for Harvard, they've won 2 lawsuits now to keep their right for international students. And so I think they'll be able to take students all fine. We're of course helping kids this year who are sort of nervously waiting to begin this class, but I think that should also be okay. Then finally, there's the visa interviews. Unfortunately, this year's Kiwis largely have their visa interviews already scheduled at the embassy, so they should be able to get their student visas. But if that's stuck around for a while, that could be a bit spicy. But on the whole, it seems like it's de-escalating quite a bit.
You're an international student at these institutions. How would your life be different if you didn't get to have that experience?
Yeah, I mean, well, selfishly, I've already knocked out a lot
You've
of my
done a
studies,
few.
so I think I'd be all right. But, it would be sad. And I think about actually what I would feel like if I was 17 or 18, holding my Harvard offer back when I was in New Zealand, and this whole wide world of America and, entrepreneurship and everything was closed, and, what that would be like. Because I would have spent at that point 4 or 5 years training to get into Harvard, like many of our students do. So it would be absolutely gut-wrenching. And so we're, of course, working very hard through all the channels we can to make sure our students can, of course, enroll on campus. And my general advice for an ambitious high schooler is don't blink, keep preparing. And, by the time you apply, you should be nicely settled down.
Jamie's taking even more bets on himself. He's enrolled at Columbia to study journalism here and is currently studying healthcare policy at Cornell.
So that's
just casually.
That's a new and exciting one for me, learning a bit more about different health systems around the world. So that's,
Why? Why healthcare?
Well, I guess I'm really interested in healthcare because I guess if you think about, for example, New Zealand, two of the biggest expense items for the country is education and health. And for a long time, we've actually had a pretty good healthcare system in New Zealand, but it's struggling recently with long wait times, inflated costs. And so it's actually really interesting learning about other models, for example, in places like Switzerland or even some of the challenges in privatization in North America. So yeah, really fun intellectual adventure.
I think I know you well enough, Jamie, to guess that you're probably going to start like a healthcare academy or privatized healthcare business off the back of that, knowing you.
The 10 guys are doing it well right now, but we have got some amazing health work experience programs for our students where, kids can, for example, hop into, online medical experiences and learn what it's like. So there's a bit of a crimson link, of course.
I look forward to seeing it.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you so much for having us. I really appreciate your time.
Cheers, you too.
Thanks for watching Markets with Madison. If you enjoyed this interview, please hit the like and subscribe buttons below. I do all of the research for these episodes myself, so your support means a lot. I always love to hear your feedback and ideas, so please drop any thoughts in the comments below. Now go put your money to work.